This goes straight to that. All right. Thank you, everyone, for this coming. We're going to get this panel rolling.
Can everyone hear him?
Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, I can be a lot louder if that's necessary.
That works.
All right. Well, hello and greetings to all. Before I do anything else, I want to give a special thanks to the video live stream team: Ted, Jeff, Nathan, Austin, and Mariana. These folks have been real great all weekend. They've made it possible for folks on the internet all over the world to view what we're doing here today, and I just wanted to give them a special thanks because they're some of the folks who are doing the work.
Thank you.
So, having said that, the title of this panel is MMT in the Streets, Grassroots Organizing and Mass Mobilization. I'm your moderator, Timothy Fong. I am a board member of the Modern Money Network and finishing up a master's in statistics at Baruch College in New York City. I'm also a recovering real estate attorney, to the extent that matters towards anything. The Modern Money Network aims to bring accurate and accessible knowledge of our monetary and financial system to the broader public. MMN also seeks to sharpen and refine knowledge of money and finance by fostering an interdisciplinary community devoted to learning and scholarship. It is our belief that the panel this morning is the conference's most important. The purpose of this panel is to discuss the applicability of MMT to social movements and grassroots organizing. We've put together this panel in appreciation of the vital connection between social and intellectual movements. We believe that this is an urgent task in a time of catastrophic events, both weather and political. Please allow me to introduce our panelists. I will introduce them in reverse alphabetical order because it's good to change things up and make sure folks whose name is at the end of the alphabet get as much attention as folks at the beginning of the alphabet. Shawn Sebastian is co-director of the Fed Up campaign. At the campaign, Shawn helps bring the voices of working class people of color to the previously closed off policy debates about monetary policy and Federal Reserve governance. Before joining CPD, Shawn worked at the Best Practices Foundation in Bangalore, India, providing research, writing, and policy support to organized federations of grassroots women's movements. Shawn then worked on issues of gentrification and slum housing in South Los Angeles at Esperanza Community Housing Corporation, and immediately prior to joining CPD, Shawn was a fellow with the Anti-Corruption Unit at the Open Society Foundation's Justice Initiative. Shawn graduated from New York's University School of Law and the University of Iowa. Jesse Myerson is an organizer with Hoosier Action. Hoosier Action emphasizes robust community organizing where campaigns are built around economic and social issues that impact people and communities across Indiana. In addition to social movement organizing, Jesse is also a journalist and has played no small part in popularizing MMT among the left with articles in Rolling Stone, The Nation, and Salon, among other publications. He is also a trained clown, semi-frequent Fox News guest with the untrained clowns, and third-generation communist. Laura Hanna is a co-founder and a director of the Debt Collective, a membership-based economic justice organization. She serves as board president of the Rolling Jubilee, a fund that has facilitated $33 million of debt relief to people struggling with predatory debts, including medical debts and student loans. She has a background in social justice filmmaking. Prior to political organizing, she worked with the Capitol Habeas Unit in Philadelphia to develop film and media strategies on behalf of those facing the death penalty. She is co-founder of Hidden Driver Productions and has produced and directed films that have been screened at film festivals and installed in museums in the US and abroad. Ann Larson. Ann is co-founder and co-director of the Debt Collective. Previously, as a higher education researcher, Ann conducted a multi-year study of low-income, first-generation students. She co-authored the Debt Resisters Operation Manual and wrote reports, Death by For-Profit Healthcare and Take, Remake, Liberate, a higher education platform. Her writing on labor, education, and debt has appeared in Dissent, Jacobin, New Labor Forum, and the Los Angeles Times, among others. Last but certainly not least, Steve Grumbine, founder of Real Progressives, is the father of 9 children, 5 boys and 4 girls, an advocate for a progressive agenda based on the public purpose through the advancement and understanding of modern monetary theory. He has worked with the Green Party, Progressive Independent Party, Draft Bernie, and other progressive organizations to facilitate a greater understanding of how to pay for progressive agendas. He, along with the organization he founded, strive to educate, activate, and provide an alternative perspective through various forms of media to demonstrate the, as he calls it, true north of the progressive movement. Steve is a program manager by trade and holds a Master of Business Administration and a Master of Science and Technology Management from the University of Maryland, University College, including a graduate certificate in Strategic Management of Technology and Innovation. Won't you please all join me in welcoming our panelists? So now we are going to go starting with Shawn, starting with Jesse. The panelists have decided amongst themselves that they're going to change up the order. So take it away, Jesse.
That's how grassroots organizers do. Let's see. Oh, where am I? Yeah, now we're talking. Am I missing it? You. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. 8:30 a.m. on the third day of a conference is no small feat. So greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Tim, for introducing us and for introducing me to MMT initially, years and years ago.
You can take the microphone off of that if you want.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it's so casual this way.
Freddie Mercury.
Kind of the Freddie Mercury.
As Tim said, I'm a community organizer with Hoosier Action. We're based in southern Indiana. So greetings from that part of the heartland. Hoosier Action is a member-owned and led organization. We bring southern Indiana's working families into real relationship with one another. We fight for a small-town agenda based on working Hoosiers' collective self-interest. Don't say Indianans. It's like saying Houston Street in New York. Marshers and outside.
Yeah.
Hoosiers! We fight for a small-town agenda based on working Hoosiers' collective self-interests against the rich and powerful, standing between us and the Indiana we deserve. That's a key phrase, the Indiana we deserve, so keep that in mind. I'll return to it later. A little bit more about us. We implement mass canvasses, listening tours, house parties, and above all, one-to-one conversations to stand up local chapters throughout the region, run issue campaigns, and perform vital political work in the run-up to elections. So that's a little bit about Hoosier Action. We're new. We started in April. I moved to Indiana from New York City to help start this initiative up, starting with a woman named Kate Hess-Pace, who's from the region, who is a wonderful, long-time organizer and a very inspiring leader. I'm extremely excited to work with every day. So I've identified a few topics in MMT that I want to briefly mention and then talk about their relevance to the work that we do. I want to mention the Minsky's emphasis on accounting, and his description of the capitalist system is described by a set of interrelated balance sheets and income statements. I want to mention the hierarchy of moneyness, going all the way from IOUs up to government money, and the importance of sort of multiplicity of monies, and of course sectoral balances, government sector, private, domestic sector, and foreign sector. And the ways in which these concepts are relevant to the work that I do with Hoosier Action is they are not relevant to the work that I do with Hoosier Action. I'm sorry to say. I don't say that just to be mean, because I know people in this room prioritize these concepts and that these preoccupy people. I don't say it to be mean, but if that does agitate you a little bit, to be told that the thing that you care about doesn't really matter, that's good. I like agitation. I'll tell you why in just a little while. But if you feel that agitation, live in it, breathe through it, we'll get there. Partly I bring this up because over the course, I've totally changed up this presentation over the course of the last couple of days, because over the couple of days I've identified a couple of ideas that are thrown around here pretty effortlessly that I think deserve a little bit of interrogation. So I've renamed this presentation 2 Deadly Innocent Frauds About Why MMT is Not Hegemonic. There's a lot of discussion about, like, why are we still losing? Like, we're right, they're wrong, the conventionalists are wrong, and history is proving them wrong every single day, and nobody can defeat our arguments because we're objectively correct about how money is endogenous and how it comes into the economy and what it is capable of doing. So why are we still losing? And I've heard 2 deadly innocent frauds about why that try and explain the answer to this question that I think are wrong. The first one, we are not explaining it well enough. I heard this from Jan Kriegel the other day. I heard it from the good Lord yesterday evening. Just in my little private check-in with him. And this basically holds that if we had a better written report, or if we somehow got in the right publications or the ears of the right staffers or of the right Fed officials, then we would be winning over the kind of austerity-focused, conventional neoliberal thinkers. I think that is not true, and I'll get a little more into that later. There's a second deadly innocent fraud that I think is more true, but I still think is wanting, and that is what Bill Mitchell was talking about yesterday. We are not framing it well enough. I think this is true, and I take very seriously his presentation yesterday about how if you say deficit, that just sounds like shortfall. It sounds bad to people, and people don't want a bigger deficit because deficit is bad because it's a shortfall. I think that's real and legit, and as we're going forward, we should really take those lessons to heart and change up our language so that it's not sort of automatically invoking understandings and frames that are counter to our arguments. But I want to propose a different answer for why MMT is not hegemonic. I want to say that the conceptual frameworks that predominate in the academy and in the media and among politicians reflect, do not shape, but reflect the priorities of the people who are in power.
Yes.
And as long as the billionaire class is tiny and controls the media and the politics and the intelligence services and all of that stuff, as long as they're that powerful, whatever economics, however faulty and false and disproven, serves their agenda, that's going to be the hegemonic economics. And so it stands to reason that if our economics is going to become hegemonic, the way it's going to happen is through building the power of the working class. Yes. That's the only. So I want to get us really focused on power. If we had a really strong, and we know this because everybody here is in some sense a school of history, and we know that in the time when labor was at its most powerful in the United States, those couple of crucial post-war years before Taft-Hartley, that was the time when economics that was kind of similar to ours was the dominant mode. Keynes kind of ruled, and that's like. So we know, we can see that in history, and so the challenge before us is growing the power of the working class, to contest with the power of the billionaires, and therefore make space for, in putting forth an agenda, make space for an economics that justifies and supports that agenda. And I just want to say quickly that I do appreciate, I'll share this. This is our first stab at doctrine. Hoosier axiom, little pun. I just want to go through this so you get a sense of where we're coming from. The first one is that organized people and organized money, that is what power is. That's what we believe power is. Organized people plus organized money. 2, relationships are at the core of organizing. 3, and this is very important, we have a chapter in Bloomington, Indiana, which is a college town. It's very important to get academics into believing this third one. Great ideas, good intentions, and well-written reports do not change the world. Real social change happens through tension, agitation, and building power. That's why I say if it agitates you a little bit to be told that what you care about doesn't matter, that like, good, we're changing the world. 4, our job is to move people from scarcity to abundance, from isolation to community, and from despair into action. There is so much isolation, despair, and scarcity in southern Indiana. People just don't feel like they can do anything. Of course they can. 5th, advancing our vision of abundance is a direct confrontation with the forces of racism and hatred and a path forward to a society based on equality and justice. And I'll go into that more later because that's a problem in southern Indiana. 6, we determine what's possible, no one else. 7, we are disciplined. We do what we say we'll do when we say we'll do it. We show up on time. We hold honest and direct conversations. We don't make excuses and we don't reward victimhood. 8, organizers don't help others. We invite others to join us in taking action around our collective self-interest. We're not a service organization. 9, we are afraid and angry. And the people on the other side of doors across the state are afraid and angry too. And 10, a well-functioning organization is necessary to contest for power. So you can see we're kind of power-obsessed. It's not what it sounds like. What I mean to say is we're power-hungry. It is what it sounded like. We're like really focused on building power. That's kind of, every meeting we have has like a portion of training people on power. How am I doing on time?
We are at 8:50, so you're doing good.
So I just want to, knowing that the MMT stuff doesn't really come into the work because my members, they don't care about sectoral balances. I couldn't get them to care if I tried to, and actually I don't think they need to care in order to build power. I do want to identify 3 areas where there's stuff in MMT that resonates with what we're doing. Not that it necessarily forms it, but there's some resonance. The first one is the legal realist aspect of it, which really is power focused, which does emphasize the real obligations that property imposes, and is clear-eyed about the terms on which those real obligations are imposed, like by violence. And that's something that I know I've talked a lot with the MMN folks about, and that's a strain of modern monetary theory that I think is really useful and power-focused in a way that neoliberalism and a sort of assumption that markets and capitalism are sort of naturally occurring is not at all power-focused. That serves to conceal power. I think MMN or MMT in this case kind of can serve to focus us on power in a really interesting way. The second one is an emphasis on real resources, where like money is fake, man. It's like we just make it up, but it's like the real resources that matter. If we can marshal the real resources to achieve a public purpose, we can afford the number of dollars. I mean, that's really, really useful. And that's useful to our question, what sort of Indiana do we deserve? When we say the rich and powerful standing between us and the Indiana we deserve, what is that? What does that mean? And this is an exercise that we take our members through every new member orientation, which happens every month. We do a visioning exercise where we'll sit around for a half hour, and I'll say, what does healthcare look like in the Indiana we deserve? What does education look like? What does free time look like? What does family life look like? What does public space look like? What does policing and imprisonment look like? All these things, and we come up, and people get, when you challenge them to do that, they get visionary. They do. They believe that we deserve a really beautiful world, and there's so much consonance in what people want for themselves and their family and their community. If you take it out of like the parties or political buzzwords or whatever, and there's stuff that divides people in southern Indiana, like we don't touch abortion or guns, because we think that will alienate people that we could build power around, and there are also good organizations doing work around those. But if you ask people what sort of Indiana we deserve, they get real visionary, and MMT means that abundance is possible. That like we don't have to be in a scarcity place. We can have all of the things we want if we get enough power. There's nothing on the list, big list of stuff that people come up with as a wish list for the Indiana we deserve that we can't get if we have enough power. So the crucial task is getting enough power. Once we get enough power, we can afford it. Okay, so those are 3 little areas of resonance. I wanted to go a little bit more into this one because we've got I'll tell you in a sec. Hoosier action number 5, just to remind you, advancing our vision of abundance is a direct confrontation with the forces of racism and hatred and a path forward to a society based on equality and justice. I want to show you a hypothetical mission statement of a political party. We are America's first political party created by and for working families. Our mission is defending family and folk against the politicians and oligarchs who are running America into the ground. We intend to achieve that goal by building a nationwide network of grassroots local leaders who will lead Americans toward a peaceful and prosperous future, free from economic exploitation and tyranny. Raise your hand if that sounds like the sort of thing you might want to get involved in. All right, real quick, I'm going to take like 2 or 3 people. What's a key phrase that sticks out to you that really resonates?
Exploitation.
Exploitation.
Lead Americans toward
Tyranny. Peaceful and prosperous future. Well, so this is where I revealed to you that this is not actually a hypothetical mission statement. This is an actual mission statement with a couple of key redactions. For the Traditionalist Workers' Party, it took out faith, federal tyranny, and anti-Christian degeneracy. Which is like an important little bit there. This is a major white supremacist sect operating in Paoli, Indiana, like an hour south of Bloomington. And you can see that they're going for the same people that we're going for. They're trying to organize the same people that we're trying to organize, and they know exactly the language. Boy, that's Matthew Haibach. He's their head. He's actually from the wealthy D.C. suburbs, wouldn't you know it? But he lives in Paoli, Indiana. That's him in Charlottesville, where he was a key figure. If you watched the Vice documentary, he was pretty featured. And here we are. There's Indianapolis. That's the top of our district that we're organizing in. There's Bloomington. There's Paoli. This is Louisville, Kentucky. So that's Haibach. And the difference between him and us is that they're going out and organizing on the basis of scarcity. They're saying there's not enough, so we white people got to stick together. We got to put ourselves first and claim the resources for us. And the Mexicans are coming for your jobs, and the black people are coming for your tax dollars, and the Muslims are coming for your churches, and we got to keep them out because we got to look out for us. They're organizing the same people we're organizing on the basis of scarcity. And it's our job, if we want to defeat them, to out-organize them, to go to the same constituencies that they're trying to organize with a beautiful vision of abundance. And say there is enough to go around, it's just that these few people on Wall Street are hoarding it, and they're the ones that are screwing you over and keeping you addicted and stuff like that. And this is, I just want to make clear that this racist politics of scarcity, as I call it, is not exclusive to just like neo-Nazi militias and sects. It goes straight to the top. When Ronald Reagan was talking about welfare queens, he was trying to make white people scared that black women were taking their hard-earned tax dollars, and the reason he was doing that was to gut welfare, and that hurt lots of white people. And black people, and brown people, and women, and men, and people who are neither of those. It hurt people across the board, especially children and elderly people. When Bill Clinton was talking about super predators and gangs running wild in the streets, he was trying to gin up that fear with the racist politics of scarcity in order to enhance a mass incarceration system that locks up so many white people, and black people, and brown people. There's lots of people in southern Indiana who are addicted to drugs who get thrown in jail for it. Lawrenceburg, Indiana, which is a small town just on the other side of the border from Cincinnati, sends more people to prison than Durham and San Francisco put together.
More per capita than any city in the nation. It's
So
a
that's-
town of 6,500.
And it's all white people who are on drugs, and they get hurt by this racist politics of scarcity. Mike Pence, our beloved former governor, when he was campaigning against voter fraud, he was using the racist politics of scarcity about like immigrants are coming and contaminating our democracy and corrupting our election results in order to lead these voter purges, which have disenfranchised thousands of Hoosiers of all colors. So what I'm trying to say is that this racist politics of scarcity doesn't just have the effect of hurting the people it demonizes in its rhetorical application, it has the effect of hurting poor and working class people across the board, of every color and of every gender. And so what I'd like to challenge you to do, and what I challenged our members to do, and everybody who came to the meeting that we called in the wake of Charlottesville, is think about how the racist politics of scarcity hurts you. Because if you can do that, then we can get out of a frame where, because we're mostly white in this room, where white people see ourselves only as the beneficiaries of white supremacy, and if we do that, then we're stuck in a mode of being allies, of like helping somebody else in their struggle to get free. But if we can focus on the ways in which the politics of scarcity hurts us, then we can see our liberation as bound up in everybody else's liberation. We can envision a collective liberation and an interracial partnership around that takes everybody's oppressions quite seriously and sees one another as teammates and not just as, some people are doing the work and other people are in alliance with them. So I'm not going to have you talk about this right now as I've done to our product, but something worth thinking about, maybe write that down. How does the racist politics of scarcity hurt me? Like me, I'm on measly catastrophic health insurance because we don't have universal health insurance because of the racist politics of scarcity. Okay, last bit, how can MMTers help to build working class power? If that's the goal, a few things. One, decenter the academy. I know this is hard because a lot of people are in the academy, but the question, and there are people here who do this really well, like I'm thinking about Dr. Kelton, I'm thinking about Mark Paul, who goes to social movements and base building organizations and says, how can I help? What's a white paper that I can write that would help your campaign? So if you can see, if we can get out of a place where we keep seeing the academy, and this is something I've heard a few times, as the place where ideas emanate from, and then other people are influenced by it, and start seeing the academy as potentially a support system to groups that are working to build working class power that can provide crucial intellectual buttress around those movements, that will be really, really helpful. Number two, consider your own liberation, as I just challenged you, and how it relates to the collective liberation. So not just seeing yourself as in a kind of charity role, but actually getting clear about your stake in the fight. And then lastly, become a dues-paying member of Hoosier Action at www.hoosierAction.org/join us. You don't have to be a Hoosier to be a member of Hoosier Action. Your money, as you know, is just as good if it comes from elsewhere as if it comes from Indiana, and you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Cheers. Thanks, everybody. How I do?
Yeah, that was perfect.
Cheers.
I think I might actually pull it a different presentation.
Okay. Sounds good.
Statistically perfect, right? I don't know about that. What's the age spread? One just turned 2 years, one's 27. I've been active through the decade. The whole generation.
Yes.
I can also do this. So thank you so much, Jesse. My name is Shawn Sebastian. I'm the co-director of the Fed Up campaign. And to be honest, I'm very new to MMT and modern monetary theory. I kind of just met Raul and Rohan just a couple weeks ago. And this has been really interesting, really great to get exposed to all of these ideas. And I just want to really second everything Jesse said, and just everything that Jesse said is incredibly important. There's no way we're going to make change unless we build that formulation: organized money plus organized people equals power. Is that's exactly right. And there's no way we're going to make change unless we have a mass movement of people. And that's where it begins. It doesn't begin with the ideas. It begins with the bringing together a mass movement of people in common cause with each other. We saw that in the civil rights era, when the first sort of demands for full employment or some of the first demands for full employment were coming around. There were 10 million people in the streets for Full Employment Action Week. We need to get back to that level. So I think Jesse laid out some of the work that he's doing in Indiana, doing the hard work of base building organizations. And I work at the Center for Popular Democracy, which is a network of organizations like Hoosier Action, including Hoosier Action, across the country, about 45 organizations like that in 33 different states. So Fed Up began in 2014 with the basic idea that the Federal Reserve was the most important policymaker in the country. Like, if we cared about jobs, if we cared about wages, the Federal Reserve was the one that was making the decisions that were making those things possible or impossible. Our network of organizations is incredible, like brings together people very much in New York, in San Francisco, in Seattle, etc. And we were starting to win things like a $15 minimum wage, fighting for things like paid sick across the country, but like ultimately those wins depend completely on the power of workers. Workers who are willing to step off from behind a McDonald's counter and join a strike. Workers who lose that job and get another job, like that's the unit by which those things happen. And if the unemployment rate is 8% instead of 5%, that decision to step out from behind a counter becomes that much harder. So everything that we fight for locally, whether it's minimum wage, paid sick days, paid family leave, all of those things depend on the leverage of workers, which depends on the unemployment rate, which ultimately the Federal Reserve has the most control over. And that was a space that progressives had totally ceded. Like no one was fighting there, right? Like the only people that were talking were insane gold standard people, like libertarian, Rand Paul, insane people. And the progressives were not fighting there. So the idea, the theory was like, part of the reason behind this is the idea was that the Federal Reserve are technocrats. They're not susceptible to political pressure, and they're not going to listen to people. But we found that wasn't true. Okay, this is not working. So we found that wasn't true, right? So I'll just tell you a bit about like how we started. We kind of like were kicking around this idea in the summer of 2014, and a lot of these questions were unresolved, right? Like, can the Federal Reserve be influenced? Can people make a difference? Regular people make a difference? Will regular people even understand what's going on and like what's at stake? And we're having these questions, and we had a conversation with some of our partners in July. And in August, the Federal Reserve has this huge meeting in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Do folks know about that meeting? Right? Like all of the central bankers from around the world go to like the most remote, whitest, hardest to get to place in the country and like make big plans without anyone else like being there, right? So we brought like 10 black and brown folks from Minneapolis, from like different Federal Reserve cities, right? Minneapolis, New York, St. Louis, and we just wore green t-shirts and we brought signs and we didn't really know what was going to happen. And we got a huge amount of attention. We got coverage in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and like all kinds of outlets after that. Esther George, the Fed president here in Kansas City, who hosts the convening, like reached out to us and like sat down with us on the day of the biggest, her biggest day of the year for 2 hours. And Janet Yellen agreed to meet with us privately, all just by showing up. So I just want to like build off of what Jesse was saying, which is that like this is possible, right? Like I think like we didn't have a lot we had 10 people that were like going to this place, and like we were able to get all of that going. So like there's a lot stacked against us. There's all the money in the world, all the billionaires in the world, all of that. But it's also fragile in these ways that we don't know unless we like try poking at it. And so that happened when we first started. After that, like it's been kind of like a whirlwind since then, right? So like I think it's this technocratic organization that cannot be influenced by outside pressure. Like we have no metric for knowing if we actually are having an influence on that conversation or not. But like now it's not just gold standard people talking. Now there's like low income black and brown people who are making an argument that their lives should not be sacrificed for a specter of inflation that isn't around, right? Like we are actually like in the pages of the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and New York Times regularly putting forward that argument. And I think like another thing about this is it's not just about people, like mass numbers of people also. Like, it's about people who are affected actually speaking in that voice. So we didn't invent like progressive monetary policy at all, right? Like there were a lot of people from the Economic Policy Institute, from the AFL-CIO, from like a lot of places who were writing white papers that were like well received and accurate and all of that. And they did not get the same sort of like coverage and ability to sway and shape the media narrative that we have. And the only difference is that we are telling the story through the eyes of working people, right? Like we are working with academics, just as Jesse said, like working with academics as our partners, but we are centering and starting with the lives of workers, right? So we've been able to do a series of reports and have a series of kind of like policy interventions because of that. So I'm just gonna say a little bit about how this works out in the field. We have organizational partners in each of the 12 Federal Reserve cities, right? And so again, another word on what's possible. We've met with Janet Yellen and Stanley Fischer twice. We've met with every single Federal Reserve president, like our partners have. We've like gone to Jackson Hole every year since then, and the press this last time like covered our events in the same way that they covered the events going on inside. We're like part of the roundups of what's happening at Jackson Hole. So like these things are really possible, but it starts with something really hard, which is like you need a room like this, right, with like 25 or 30 people who are showing up to learn about like why does the Federal Reserve matter to me? How does the Federal Reserve affect my jobs and my wages? Because you're not going to like knock on doors and be like, hey, you want to fight the Federal Reserve? Come with me, and then like have a parade marching down the street. Like that's not going to happen. Like what you have to do is you do what Jesse's doing and bring together people with common cause, whether it's like fighting racism, fighting for a higher minimum wage, like fighting for DACA. Each of our partners in different places fight different things, and in some ways overlapping. Like in New York, our base is almost entirely Latino immigrants. And the thing that they care about most is immigration. In St. Louis, our partner has been, like we went to Jackson Hole the first time 2 weeks after Ferguson, right? So like their primary interest is in policing and racial justice, right? So we come in on, we don't organize people on the basis of the Federal Reserve. We don't organize people on the basis of monetary policy. We take people who have been organized on the thing that matters most to them, and then they've been politicized by organizers on the ground doing that work of politicizing them, and then they are willing to listen and engage on this fight. So there is just like a deep infrastructure of a ton of hard day-to-day work that our campaign has to exist on top of. And it wouldn't be possible to do this work without the work that like Jesse and like all of our other partners across the country do. So I would just like emphasize what Jesse said, like to do the thing that we want to do here at MMT is to change the way people think about economics and think about what's possible. Actually, what we have to do is start with people and what they care about. And things like racism and immigration and like those issues are not a distraction, but they're like a prerequisite to doing this work. So that's been my experience at least. So just to like go over some of the things that we've been able to accomplish since we started. The most recently, this is an example maybe of like how the academics and the movement stuff has worked for us. Sometimes it goes one way, like sometimes it goes it's a two-way street, honestly. So like we have been, since we began, focused on racial disparities and how the recovery has not reached Black and brown communities especially. And that came straight from our membership. Like, our membership was like, how are people saying that the economy has recovered? Nothing has changed in my neighborhood. Unemployment is still really high, et cetera. All these things they intuitively knew. We worked with think tanks like the Economic Policy Institute, Policy Link, the Center for Economic and policy research, like progressive DC think tanks, to just like package that like intuitive thing that they knew into actually statistics and data that the Federal Reserve could absorb and take seriously. So that was something, and another piece of that that like has bubbled up from people's experiences is scheduling. Is like this is something that's incredibly difficult to understand through statistics. Like I think the closest thing that we have is the involuntary part-time employment rate, but that doesn't tell you how much scheduling in retail and fast food has changed in the last 10 years. People do not get their schedules the day before they are supposed to work. Their schedules can vary from 30 hours one week to 10 hours the next week, so they have no idea of what their bills will be. They can be called in to work and show up, like pay for a bus, take a half-hour drive to their work, and then be told, actually, we don't need you anymore, and not get paid at all. There's a whole universe of just exploitation that happens within that one statistic that comes out when you actually talk to working people working those jobs that like the Federal Reserve doesn't know about, right? So like there's obviously the headline unemployment number and all of our critiques of the headline unemployment number, but even these other statistics like the involuntary part-time work, like those can be drilled down further and further to actually show the real softness of the labor market, because we wouldn't be treating workers like that if our labor market was strong. If our labor market was strong, like workers would not be treated like that. And that is something that the Federal Reserve actually doesn't know and doesn't really have a way to know unless they're interfacing directly with working people, and that's something that we've been able to provide. So those are ways that we feel like we've contributed to like research and things that are going on with the help of academics that have like fleshed that out for us and like help and like put it in a language in a way that decision makers can absorb. But then it also works the other way, where we were kind of in the campaign thinking about like what is a thing that you can get like general economic consensus around, and we identified the 2% inflation target. Like there's just like a broad consensus, no one really knew how broad it was, that the 2% inflation target is inadequate and needs to be moved. So like it's something that the economists knew and like had a sense of, but they never moved. They never did anything. So like it kind of like took our campaign and our campaign mindset to push them to push our economic partners to say like, let's write a letter, let's see who you can get to sign it, let's like move this around. And it was a very just grass tops kind of academics writing a letter questioning the inflation target. And it worked. We got like 25 people to sign it, including Joseph Stiglitz and Jason Furman and others. And we got the press to write about it, and then Janet Yellen was asked about it during one of her FOMC press conferences, and she, for the first time, said, like, yeah, I think that's something we should take seriously and reevaluate. So there's multiple tactics, right? Like even on a base of like grassroots engagement, like engaging with academics, engaging with other people, like it opens up a whole new world of other things. Like that letter would not have happened if we hadn't built a campaign built on like low-income people of color and their experiences. We wouldn't have been able to have the same access, and we wouldn't have been able to have that same type of intervention. So I'll just say that one more, like I guess, like just to close out, you know, the Federal Reserve right now is almost completely empty. Like we call the Federal Reserve the Supreme Court of the economy, and Donald Trump has 5 out of 7 spots to fill now, potentially. So if you can imagine if Ginsburg and Sotomayor and Kagan and Breyer and Kennedy all just retired tomorrow, like that's basically where we are with the Federal Reserve. And we're like, I'd love to talk with some of you about like ideas about like what we can do around that. Like, and I guess like this is the last thing. I'm sorry, like I had like 4 presentations and I didn't use any of them, but like the last thing I'll just say is like to keep people engaged, and like it is another part of like the mechanics of building a movement. People need something to do, People need to like get engaged and do something and see a result. And even if the result is like you lose, you like agitate them, you get them pissed off about why they lost, and then you put them in another fight. You can't just talk about ideas, you actually have to move people into action. You have to like put them into a fight. And I know that that's like probably very challenging when thinking about something like MMT, which seems like really big and really far away. But I just like to say like there's ways to engage and politicize people on these points, working people. Like one of the main pieces of skepticism we got was like, are you actually gonna tell like low income people to care about the Federal Reserve? Like that will be impossible, like you'll never do that. And we do these presentations and we talk to these rooms and people are ready to like get up and fight. People are ready to like get up and move and fight. And we just like need to channel them. So again, with Jesse, it's like not a matter of messaging. It's not a matter of framing. It's just a matter of like getting out there and doing the work of building worker power through organizations like Hoosier Action, through rebuilding the union movement. And I will say like, you should become a monthly dues paying member of Hoosier Action, or like find another community organization where you're from and become a monthly dues paying member, because that is the best way and the most direct way to make change like this possible.
So next up we have Steve. Technical question. Does this mic work also?
It does. I don't have, that's actually not one of my microphones.
I
So,
gotcha.
and it goes overhead, but I have no idea how to
Gotcha.
make it actually be loud.
I know Steve can be loud. So we have no problems with that. People's mic.
I'm going to try and make this a little bit fun. My name is Steve Grumbine. I'm the founder of Real Progressives. Some of y'all may recognize some of the people in this.
That the Democrats have to do to Republicans what the Republicans did to President Obama and to Democrats over the last 8 years, which is obstruct. That ought to be the game plan. I think that's a terrible idea. Okay, people are suffering all over this country. It explains why we have done. So if you think a good policy is to oppose anything, even the kind of things that would help create jobs and lift incomes for the middle class and for people who are struggling at the bottom end, out of spite, it's payback, right? We're going to do this. This is really, really tragic. This would be tragic.
MMT is not something that you go out and get, okay? And it's not something that you need to figure out a way to have. Okay, MMT is just a description, as we've talked about this many times. It just describes the monetary system as it is today. It's what already exists.
We view the job guarantee as an automatic stabilizer that after the initial shock of its introduction will maintain full employment and have a deflationary impact on wages. So it also contributes to price stability as well as full employment.
They were saying that's a good thing because it keeps workers in check and it keeps inflation in check. And that's a fundamental ideological belief that the neoliberals and the mainstream of the economics profession have sort of built into their models. And that's very problematic.
You can't figure out, unless we have full employment, unless everybody has access to decent work, you can't figure out, how to create, equal opportunity if there's not equal access to opportunity. You see what I mean?
Yeah, so I would say that there's that for a lot of people, especially people like Pavlina, like Stephanie, especially people like Matthew Forstater, Adil Kapoor, who you've had on, that for them, there's two parts. There's the, we're just trying to describe how this system works operationally, and then there's what are the conclusions about, you know, human life, human rights, right to employment, a right to certain basic standards of living that we both derive from this framework and also see that is possible in this framework.
Just have to keep pushing and not going away, and I'm going to keep pushing until we win or until I die.
This argument hasn't been able to be killed definitively is because the law is, and law sometimes does this, misleading. The law was created in a way that gives the impression of private ownership at a very formalistic level, even as discretionary control is not exercised at that level.
I use the example of a well-trained athlete or runner, and but we put a plastic bag over his head so he can't breathe very well, so he can't do anything. And so it's not that so we want to remove this plastic bag so the runner can get out and perform. So it's not like adding stimulus, right? It's not about that. It's about removing the drag, taking away the restrictions that are self-imposed restrictions on what we're doing. And the evidence is all the excess capacity, unemployment, low labor participation rates, everything else. We've got all this excess capacity, yet there's so many things that need to be done by all these people who are working right now.
Including a reform of the banking sector, nationalisation of banks, industry policies, employment policies, job guarantee rather than basic income, environmental type strategies, equity type strategies, and I think that brings together all the work that I've done from through an MMT lens into an actual operational plan for a political movement.
Folks, I gotta tell you, that makes me all choked up inside. It's really amazing that we have done some of the things that we've been able to do. And I say that with much humility. Let me see if I can get this thing to do. How do I get this thing set up as a PDF so I can do this as a presentation? Because right now it's not being a
slideshow.
Open week PowerPoint, maybe. Go back and back.
PowerPoint.
There you are.
all right, it's not quite.
No, it's working now. You should go move slides.
Excuse me?
I think it works with slides now.
All right, so bottom line is, this is about mobilizing real progressives. And, I want to say that real progressives is a heck of a lot more than Steve Grumbine. I've just been very visible, obviously. I've been the one constant from the beginning. I want to say that, real progressives came about as kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing against real Democrats. And it was us following Stephanie to Bernie, ironically. So what we've done is we've created a situation where we leveraged the most prevalent social media, and we've been able to speak directly to activists and other folks that are interested in changing the world, quite frankly. And because my heart was not Bernie Sanders, my heart was MMT, when I followed over there, I grew as a man, I grew as an activist. Real progressives grew into something more than what it was. And hopefully I'll be able to tell you a little bit about where we came from and where we're going. So let me scroll down here. Now, I use this picture, it's embarrassing sometimes to look at, but this is one of the promo pictures that we use. Because a lot of this is marketing. A lot of this is trying to get out there and make it snazzy, make it pop, make people pay attention. And so our graphics person likes this picture, so she uses it. But let me just tell you who I am. My name is Steve Grumbine. I am the founder of Real Progressives. I'm a program manager by trade. I do all this stuff in my spare time. I'm a father of 9 children, 5 boys, 4 girls, ranging from 2 years old up to 27. I am a former Republican. This is a very important part of this story here. I'm a former libertarian. I supported and campaigned for Ron Paul. I was a drive-by Democrat, and then I became just a real progressive that focuses solely on MMT. I supported Bernie Sanders during the primary and Jill Stein during the national election. As was stated in my intro, I have too many pieces of paper and lots of debt. And I want to go into who Real Progressives is for a moment. You know, we have approximately 500 bona fide volunteers. We have 120,000 plus followers. We have on board probably 70 people that work on a daily basis to help us out behind the scenes. We've been called a cult before. I've been called a cult leader because we have a very, very good social media army. Quite frankly, we don't take the gentle, softer approach, as some of you may know. In fact, just quick show of hands, how many of you all learned about MMT through Real Progressives? Just as an aside. Thank you very much. That warms my heart. We've been relatively effective in penetrating the left wing of our movement, so to speak, and talking with the Green Party, talking with the Justice Party, PIP, and others. So I want to go ahead and show you what our vision statement is. And I think that we've heard this from many, many of the MMTers, just talking about a second Bill of Rights. And this is kind of our driving guidepost. MMT happens to be more incidental to this than anything, because this is the time, this is the hook. You know, MMT is very boring to most people. I get 5 seconds in and their eyes are rolling back in their head and they're like, oh, he's gonna do it again, isn't he? It's like, yes, I am, I really am. But when you start talking to them about what this empowers, what this enables, what this can do, all of a sudden lights start firing, and then you get a very, very devoted soldier in this war, and it is a war. Let's go down here. This is our mission statement. So for those of you who ever wondered, Real Progressives is an independent, nonpartisan organization dedicated to educating, advocating, and empowering people to truth and progressive change across the globe. We've already started working with our Australian friends. We've been working with Irish friends, folks in Ireland, working with folks in the UK, and quite frankly, we've got friends in Canada. We've got friends all over the world. And we realize that our problems are their problems and their problems are our problems, and we can learn from one another. And once you learn MMT, it is a unifying factor. It really is the basis for which I believe a progressive movement can flourish. Ellis Winningham, who's my side, we work together. He is my mentor, he's my everything. On Sunday nights, he and I work together and do a show. And you know, he's like, Stephen, he goes, this is not a movement, this is MMT. He goes, but we need a new left in this country, not the same tired tax and spend 70s liberal that looks back to Eugene V. Debs for the way to go forward. The way forward is a new modern money economy based on things that are available to us with a new lens, with the empowerment, with that ability to see beyond the Overton window, to be able to go out and see a better future, to what you were saying, a future that you know is worthy of you or that you deserve. We feel like that is for the whole world, quite frankly. And people like Fidel Kaboub have really brought that to me to make me understand developing nations, understanding how a job guarantee pulls up, literally lifts all ships, not just in the US, but around the world. So I think this is an important, powerful statement. So for those of you who understand or have heard me speak, this is probably going to be boring to you, but I want to just state that Real Progressives is built on 4 pillars. Our policy pillar, none of us are policy wonks except for possibly Joe Firestone, who's on our team. But we expect to work with folks like you all, like Rohan and others, to be able to help guide us in some policy space that we can help leverage to work laterally across these pillars through educating, through activism, and then coming around with media to support it. So I'm not going to read this verbatim, but the bottom line is that without having some powerful hook, without having some potential policy space for people to rally around, it's almost impossible to guide them to a pathway that makes MMT matter to them. And this is one of the keys right here. These individuals are the quarterbacks of real progressives, as they will take and guide each of our actions across. The education pillar. You know, we go to coffee shops, we go to different conferences, we provide services, we teach, we do whatever. We were able to fly Rohan out to the Democracy conference in Minneapolis, spoke in front of many, many AMI, Positive Money folks, and just did a masterful job. It was great, great service by proxy. I really appreciate the partnership, Rohan. So the activism pillar is interesting because our goal is to create cells, if you will, in all the major metropolitan areas throughout the U.S. to be able to leverage all 4 of these pillars through our 7 knowledge areas. And by planting these things and tying them together through a network that we can expand to the territories and to the global regions that we have partnerships with, I believe that we can really, really, really take the world by storm. And this whole power component and the money component and the activating based on things that are tangibly important to people, I think drives this pillar. And obviously based on MMT as the answer to all things of how you're going to pay for it. So the last one is the media summary. As you saw in the beginning, you know, we do a lot of interviews. We've had a lot of access to many of the experts in the field. And we've also talked to people that are not experts in the field that are coming too. We have a friendship with Tim Canova, who, he's tweeted out many things here recently about being MMT. We've put a lot of pressure on Tim to try and step up and speak boldly about that. Talk to people like Rokana and others, and really we just try to push them. And at the end of the day, we're intending to take over town halls. We're intending to go do teach-ins in congressmen's offices. We're intending to do marches. We're intending to do anything direct in local communities or on a grand scale as we pull together our network and our partnerships. So 7 knowledge areas of real progressives are economic justice, peace with justice, environmental and ecological justice, democracy, equality with justice, health and nutrition, and technology and innovation. All of these things tie back ultimately to the enabling power of modern monetary theory. But each of these things are also a progressive guidepost. There is something that has a direct tie that activists and people that vote, quite frankly, can build a mass movement around. That's our hope, that we can tie in with groups that support these things and understand that modern monetary theory is the cornerstone of that. So I just spoke to this, the 7 knowledge areas. These folks are the quarterbacks that drive this across the lateral. It's very, very difficult to find people that have a peering level of interest, a peering level of enthusiasm, and a peering level of approach. And so we've been very selective in trying to identify these individuals that can help us drive this concept out to the streets and, quite frankly, into the White House, into Congress, into your local school board, into the Federal Reserve, and everywhere else in between. So with that, thank you very much. All right.
You know how I get to the desktop?
You go to the bottom right and click.
While we're setting this up, we want to say how important this moment is and that we're here because this early hour, which we would never ever be, because we think it's very important. So this is a first for us at 8:30 a.m.
Larson. I am director and co-founder of the Debt Collective. So we are so happy to be here. We're really excited. We've learned a lot. And I really just want to emphasize the power of the ideas that are being discussed in this space for really moving an anti-austerity politics. And it's really something. And so I want to say that and say how, what a pleasure it is for us to be here. But I also want to endorse very strongly some of the other things that we've heard today about, it's not about messaging. It's not about refining the theory. It's not about a policy statement that's written in a slightly different way. It's really about organized people, organized money. And that brings me to what we thought of as like a title for our presentation, which is like, there will be no trickle-down MMT. I'm gonna go from the academy to the public, like by accident. It just isn't. So we're here to talk a little bit about some ideas we have for how to make that happen. So the Debt Collective is a membership organization. We are dedicated to building a debtors union. One that wins public provision for public goods like healthcare, education, and jobs. The racist politics of austerity that Jesse talked about, one of the things that it produces is mass indebtedness. Right? 75% of Americans are in debt. And so debts are not held evenly, right? Predatory lending affects Black and brown communities more, we know this. But it also affects everybody. And these are, we call debt the tie that binds. It really does affect everyone in some way or the other, although it's not held evenly and people experience it in different ways. So one of the ideas that we have and one of the foundations of our organizing is we believe people need to see their debt as a potential source of power and leverage. We work with debtors to dispute debts and challenge the phony morality around debt, that creditors and debtors are on an equal playing field and debts should always be paid. And this is a morality that is crushing us in this punitive austerity regime that we're in. So, I don't know if you know who this guy is. So we take a quote from J. Paul Getty, just to sort of a little nugget of the basic idea of the Debt Collective. Another way to say it is, alone our debts are a burden, but together they have the potential to make us powerful. We're going to touch just for a few minutes on the work that we've done over the last 6 years to give you a sense of what brought us to this point. Oh, yeah. In 2012, we launched a project called the Rolling Jubilee. This was a public education initiative that abolished debt at random and challenged the fake morality of indebtedness. So far, we've canceled $33 million in medical student debt and private probation debt. This was just a crowd-funded campaign. We don't want to talk too much about the Rolling Jubilee here. If you have questions about it, we can talk about it after. But it just gives you a sense of kind of where we started back in 2012. The Rolling Jubilee campaign went viral, and a lot of people had a lot of opinions about it. It was written about in publication after publication for months after it launched, even years. And this enabled us to be active in the mainstream media cycle, which is typically very short for a long period of time. This is us, Lauren, and I, and a couple of our comrades looking a bit younger 5 years ago in the New York Times. We were able to make inroads into popular culture while communicating that when we can't pay our debts, our miseries are traded for profit by Wall Street. Then we transitioned to the next phase, which is the Debt Collective. This is our pilot debtors union. We knew that canceling debt at random was not a solution. We knew that we had to have a membership organization, a way to organize, a way to bring together organized people and organize money and build power for real change. So the Debt Collective is sort of a culminating project, and this crew that's been working on this sees it that way. The idea for the Debt Collective is to use labor organizing tactics in the space of finance. So a lot of folks don't have regular jobs anymore. I don't have to tell anyone in this room that. Precarious labor, the gig economy, part-time work. We don't share a factory floor like we used to. So, but many of us share the same creditor. We owe the same creditors, multinational corporations. And this is something that brings us together. So the Debt Collective was launched, we started around 2014. In 2015, we launched a student debt strike. It was the first in US history. It was developed in collaboration with students who had attended a chain of predatory for-profit colleges called Corinthian. Alongside the strike, we worked with lawyers to develop a legal strategy based on an obscure provision in the Higher Education Act, which says if you've been defrauded by a school, you have a right to debt relief. These are some of our members, or students from the for-profit school, and some of the direct actions that we conducted. From that effort, which included organizing, a legal strategy, media intervention, and direct action, we won $600 million in debt relief for federal student loans, and a change to federal regulations. Unfortunately, all of those wins are currently being rolled back by the new administration, so we have to keep fighting. This effort made a lot of waves in Washington, D.C., in mainstream media and popular culture. I'm going to show a couple of videos to demonstrate the way that this campaign sparked the imagination.
Students is on a debt strike. The so-called Corinthian 100 attended the for-profit Corinthian colleges, and the group is now refusing to pay back their loans totaling $3.3 million. They met with the Education and Treasury Departments yesterday. CBS News senior business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here and joins us at the table. Jill, good to see you.
Good morning.
So what are the Corinthian colleges, number one, and why are the students, why are they refusing to pay?
Well, this is a for-profit group, and it's a number of different colleges that comprise that group. These students are alleging fraud, and that's very important. They're saying not only did the school promise us that we get a good education, and it was a shabby one, they also
We need net neutrality.
That's coming up. That's a big issue.
Not only did the school promise us that we get a good education, and it was a shabby one, they also only did the school promise us that we get a good education, and it was.
Well, you get the idea. What? Anyway, you get the idea. National media, right. CBS Morning Show, you got it. We also made inroads into the cultural space in other ways. The writers for the TV show The Good Wife wrote an episode based on our work. This is a clip from the episode. I had never seen the show before. It was like kind of surreal watching this unfold on a TV show. The college in the clip is called Coliseum. The real one is called Corinthian, although Corinthian is mentioned. And I want to just point out that the heroes in this clip are the lawyers, which, no offense lawyers, but which is
completely distorted.
It's a little bit
real
distorted.
narrative.
So hopefully this will play.
Oh, I agree. I think maybe a class action makes sense. Wait, I'm not sure if we have the wherewithal. Actually, a class action isn't possible here. Why is that? The enrollment agreement you signed. When you registered at Coliseum, you signed a document saying you wouldn't sue the school. Signing 100 pieces of paper. I mean, we can really sign away our rights. Unfortunately, yeah, legally you can. Okay, so the school can screw all of us and then trick us into not doing anything about it?
A class action suit isn't possible, but a debt strike is. That's only happening at a for-profit Corinthian college.
Oh, thank
Thank God for middle age like
This is a list of 350 Coliseum graduates who are ready to default collectively and suffer the consequences unless you intervene with the Department of Education and the loan companies to settle their debts.
Really? Getting desperate, aren't we?
It's a debt strike. Let's see how that will play with your resale value. Or you can settle. We're listening.
So, I'm endlessly entertained by that. I mean, I've only seen it 5 times, but each time it's just so funny and surreal. Why are we here? Okay, we just ran through a little bit of our work of the last 6 years. If you can't hear me, let me know. I'll speak up in front of the microphone. Switch the slides. Great, I'm not going to stand. So early on in this organizing work that we were doing, when we launched the strike and started to work with people, very quickly a narrative popped up that was a counter narrative, which we call the taxpayer narrative. And that narrative was again and again reproduced in the mainstream media that, well, of course we all know these student debtors have been screwed, and they should of course receive debt relief and debt cancellation, and we're all trying very hard, the Obama administration tried very hard to do this. We can't do it because it's going to cost the taxpayer so much money. Okay, so this argument came up over and over again. And the fact is that the debtors that we're working with believed it. And they'd internalized it. They'd internalized kind of a scarcity narrative to the degree that they were worried for their fellow taxpayer. Because what happened during the housing crash? The taxpayers had to pay for it, right? And any time that any money is taken from somewhere, apparently we have to pay for it with our taxes. So this story came up again and again. We had to do work constantly with our people to tell a different story. Alongside that other organizing work, of course, we weren't just doing debtor organizing, we were also talking about a positive vision, as Jesse and others pointed out, critical. And what we found came up again and again when we talked about whether it was a federal job guarantee or universal health care or education, that, they had internalized scarcity to the degree that they're willing to tighten their belts because that's the only thing that they knew. So it's a hard narrative to crack. And of course, this is the question that came up. Okay, great, that's all great, it sounds good. How are we gonna pay for it? We would encounter this all the time. And all the same problems come up that you've already described and that you know very well, apparently. Inflation, apparently every single guy that's on the internet that we're working with knows everything about Econ 101. I mean, it's insane. So it was inflation, it's the taxpayer narrative, it's the government is already destroying my life, why would I give them more power to destroy me even more? And that's real.
That's real.
So some of the common responses from our members when we've tried to do some work around a positive vision and how we pay for it are the following. Up here, I'm not going to bother to read them. I'll let you just read them. Probably familiar responses that you've encountered. So the right-wing revolution that we're fighting against has been, continues to be very well planned and well funded and coordinated. And it will continue to be. And we have a responsibility to be honest about that and figure out how to be more strategic, right? And a bit more disciplined and understanding that opposition. The good news from our perspective is that there has obviously been a good amount of scholarly work and intellectual work and a foundation that's been built over, it sounds from the panel that you were on yesterday morning at this ungodly hour, for 20 years, right, in the works. So the intellectual work's been done. It's, from our brief encounter with it, wonderful, inspiring, moving, empowering, difficult to communicate. It is not just a framing issue. These ideas need to be put into practice. And that's what we were trying to communicate very briefly in our presentation prior to this around the initiatives that we are working on and have worked on. as Anne said, MMT won't trickle down. It won't trickle down. We can be here in another 20 years and we'll maybe have 400 people on this path. That's the way that it is. So we think that there needs to be a commitment to a multi-pronged strategic set of interventions that's very thoughtful, well-organized, orchestrated, that understands that you need organized money, organized power, you need to do the organizing work, and then also intervene in the spaces of policy, media, popular education, public education, political education. All these things happen together. So after a lot of inspiring panels over the last 2 days, we had an idea. We're going to throw it out so we can brainstorm it, because that's what we're here to do. We have a basic proposal. Let's launch another pilot. The last 2 projects that we just described were pilots of sorts, so that we can learn from them. Here's a basic idea. Let's think about it. We could launch a pilot that could demonstrate these ideas and allow people to explore these ideas. We could create a Congress, right, and perform what it would look like to authorize spending for a federal job guarantee, but work with just a very small community and other collaborators, including scholars, policy writers, journalists, and organizers. This model could change public perception and really challenge what is possible. When you enact ideas, people think they might be possible. You have to practice the ideas. So how would this work? You could pick a location. You could work with community organizers on the ground who could make demands because they know what they need in their community for a set of jobs. This takes real resources. There are resources in the world, right? We could gather them. That community could work with a team, a policy team, to write policy and a budget proposal that then the Congress would deliberate on and then authorize to spend. That is a project that I think is really inspiring and I'd love to see in the world. That creates a lot of space in mainstream media. That creates real jobs, and that creates engagement with these ideas in a real way. So again, we think that at this point in time, there's a lot of work that's been done, foundational work, and that needs to be moved a bit more strategically, and that the power forces aren't going to invite you in for that. You know, we need to demonstrate this idea and build some counterpower in the face of that power. So yeah, that's the idea. And if we wanted to move into a discussion, as Anne said, we'd be happy to talk about the other work that we've done before in the past, after this Q&A session. But I'm more interested in thinking about how one would be very strategic and move these ideas at this point in time, because this is a moment now. And we're done. Yeah.
So we're going to open it up to Q&A. I think we have some time. So let's have questions. Are there questions? Comments? Questions?
Comments?
No?
I'm not an economics person. I've learned about MMT and it's given me hope. My background is in art and horticulture. I'm a landscape architect. But listening to Shawn, my question to Shawn is, what power do you think the Federal Reserve has? It was my understanding that all they did was set interest rates, but like I said, I'm pretty ignorant.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. I just want to follow up. The question I was going to ask also to Shawn was, one of the things that MMT sort of provides is an analysis of the relationship between fiscal and monetary policy coordination, and can provide, I think, a way to work out which things to focus on and not. And one thing that I think MMT would say, for example, about interest rates is, if you have the fiscal spending to have full employment, you're going to have full employment. And if you're raising interest rates, even with that kind of thing, in fact, raising interest rates can be inflationary because higher interest payments to people and things. So I'm curious, like, obviously I'm a huge fan of your work, really, really glad that you're here. Everyone in this panel is doing amazing work. So grateful this is happening. I'm curious what you see if you think a similar narrative or a coordinated narrative could be, around broader fiscal policy, but sort of, again, focusing on whether it's the Treasury or sort of what the institutional locus would be on that, whether you think it is the Fed and saying, even if the Fed's impotent, it's convinced the world that it isn't impotent, and it's convinced the world that this question of the unemployment rate is one that it's domain to decide, and the fact that it sort of tilts at the weather maybe with its interest rate policy is still separate to the fact that it's deciding as a public matter when we're at full employment, and that's shaping the public discourse. So just
the Fed's a regulator.
Yeah, in addition to its regulation and everything else.
Well, it's also not a
In theory, the Fed
also a bunch of poor people of color across this country.
No doubt.
It's not been told.
Okay, so these are the points that I would make. I mean, plenty of reasons to be fed up with a lot of policy, not just Federal Reserve policy, but the lack of attention paid to the supervisory and the regulatory role of the Fed. The lacquer leaks, I mean, these are things that make Janet Yellen crazy when they come up. Like, she definitely does not want to have questions about lacquer and so forth. Interest rates, I mean, Ron's point is correct. For us, this is, the goals of full employment and price stability, or low inflation, let's say. Good, great macroeconomic goals. Go get them, Tiger. Well, we've given the mandate to the wrong institution. We put the Fed in charge, and it's like, you steer the U.S. economy. You have an overnight interest rate. Go get them, Tiger. It's a crazy thing to believe that the Federal Reserve is the correct institution. So on top of that, Yellen, in an address just the other day, after the Fed minutes come out, she can't resist saying something about the deficit problem, right? And so she's like saying, the Fed wants to be independent. Leave us alone. We're independent. We conduct monetary policy. Don't talk to us about what we do. But then she slides in a little thing about, the fiscal crisis and the need to get the budget in balance and so forth. And it's like, wait a minute. They're independent. Leave them alone. You stay in your, you stay in your wheelhouse. You stay on your lane, and let the fiscal authority do its job. So I would have plenty of reasons to be anxious and angry at the Fed for a variety of reasons. The interest rate ain't one of them. And so I would echo those concerns, that these guys raise. Go after them on supervisory and regulatory and all that other kind of stuff, and then broaden the thing about which you're fed up to include the lack of Congress doing its job to help deliver a more prosperous and fair economy for everybody.
And blaming the Fed.
And blaming that, yeah.
Right. So, we get this question a lot, and I'm totally sympathetic to it, right? Like, the idea was not that the Fed is the appropriate institution to be making these decisions. The idea is not that we like the way things are, and the idea is not that we're satisfied with fiscal austerity at all. No, not at all. Obviously, if we could have Medicare for all, and if we had a Congress that was functional to actually meet a stimulus that have a stimulus that met the scale of the financial crash, that would have been immensely preferable to trying to advocate on monetary policy. It was just that looking at the landscape at the time and the current landscape, it was just an important policy making institution. Arguably, I guess I don't know what your opinion is on this, but when going from 15% unemployment to 5% unemployment, or less than 5% unemployment, we didn't have a fiscal stimulus that really made that happen. And I get that interest rates are not a panacea, and they're tilting at the weather in a lot of different ways. It's just an important policy tool towards making that progress. I'd much prefer if we had MMT and we were actually spending freely and stimulating the economy and generating jobs that way. It's just part of the landscape that is not otherwise being litigated or fought over. That is responsive to your questions.
I wouldn't credit the Fed, I would credit the automatic stabilizer. So Congress gets credit, but it was a prior Congress who put in place a whole bunch of things that automatically happened to rescue us when we're spiraling downward, right?
I think the point about the legitimization of an unemployment rate is still a powerful tool. Even if they don't actually have the power to implement it, when they say oh, we're at full employment now, we've hit this Nauru, that changes the policy conversation, that legitimizes Paul Krugman to say, actually, we're back to balanced budget politics, even though I've been saying we're desperately under-resourced, desperately below real resource constraints for 8 years. Oh, wrong politicians in power, oh, suddenly actually we can't do more deficit spending, So it seems like the rhetoric of the Federal Reserve's mandate over full employment may actually be more important than the substantive policy controls it has, and that disparity could be something that could be a helpful tension to bring out of it.
So thank you, Ron, and thank you, Professor Kelvin, for your excellent and wise words on this topic. I'm going to take moderator's prerogative here, and as we used to say as attorneys, redirect this a little bit to ask a question to Anne and Laura about their proposed intervention. So you're talking about, if I can understand this, sort of gathering people in a Congress with this, what do you call it, a simulated Congress, and let's call it this job guarantee Congress, and working with local organizers someplace to find, ascertain community needs, and then develop a job guarantee program. And then the funding, of course, the question is always, how would you pay for this? Because I think we could organize people relatively easily, but you could organize people to come together and have these deliberations, but then to actually fund those jobs is always the question. So how would you address that piece in your intervention?
Yeah, I mean, there would need to be a commitment. There would need to be a commitment of resources at the beginning of the process, anonymously donated, from the interests from those who have an interest in seeing this have a life. There would need to be, a real commitment of resources. So I would leave that up to different people who maybe have access to different resources to think about, and that would be set aside, and then that process would begin. So the money would already be there. We would need to go get the money from people who have money, who have an interest in these ideas, and want to see that.
Yeah. Thank you. Other questions?
Follow-up. How is this really intriguing program not a really good example of trickle-down MMT?
Because it's piloting an idea, and it's challenging public imagination. And what it does is shift the conversation. And so there can be similar efforts alongside it, where other municipalities are engaged in creating their own proposals. And then there's an actual proposal that goes to Congress. So there's a counter-Congress, it's being demonstrated, and people are like, oh, this is an idea. Oh, I deserve jobs. Okay, maybe my municipality is going to work on this project. Oh, Congress can authorize spending? Well, why don't we do, so it's a pilot, it's an idea that can then create a groundswell for demands that come from different municipalities, and they can then create a real proposal and send it to Congress. And then it's that much harder for politicians to ignore that kind of activity because it's being demonstrated in a way. So it's not, obviously it's not, like the first project we had, the Rolling Jubilee, there were a lot of responses to it. One was like, it doesn't solve capitalism. We're like, yeah, no, it doesn't. What it does do is shift public imagination, and people suddenly understand that their misery is being traded and that they don't have a say in it, right? And that, in other words, like, there's an industry and they buy their debts when they can't afford to pay them. And then these guys over here do deals, and then they come and collect on you for the full amount, and you think you still need to pay that. And so from that work, we did work with people where they understood that they could then actively negotiate and start to challenge and work away at that like false morality. So that this is, it's a pilot. Put it into practice, it's a pilot.
I think we have time for one more question. We're running out of time.
I have a really quick comment, actually. I just wanted to thank all of you guys because we obviously don't have the expertise as the economists or the capacity to do what you're doing. You're doing amazing work, and we're so glad you're working with us, interested in working with us. I also wanted to thank everybody for using the Freddie Mercury microphone because I can envision a really cool sort of Bohemian Rhapsody voiceover. Let's put that together.
The idea for the pilot? Yeah, sure. I think that there's
there's obviously lots of designs for the job guarantee. I like Professor Chernova's idea of having communities design their own job guarantee, identify the needs in their own communities, say say how many jobs could be created to fulfill X need, and then having that just have the government, fund it basically, and so it's all kind of administered locally or municipally or in the social entrepreneurship sector. So maybe that's like a way into this kind of popular education model is convening congresses, local congresses, and saying what work does this community need done, who's available to do that work, and if you had an infinite source of money, let's say just somebody could make money out of thin air, like how would we meet our own community's needs, and in that way kind of enact this so that we're not doing a kind of mock Congress, that we're actually like in the real world talking about the needs that our communities have and how we could meet it if we had the money to do it.
So I'm happy to talk about this quite a bit longer. I just point of order, it's 10:09 and there are panels at 10:30. This gentleman has a question.
I want to build on what you just said and what Scott said, and that is yesterday's panel number 20, the latter panel in the afternoon does exactly that. It establishes an empirical, well-grounded research study over decades of data that shows the non-inflationary nature of a job guarantee program and the articulation of it by Dr. Chernowa, Dr. Kelton, Dr. Ray, and Dr. Fulweiler really dives into that, and it was a wonderful program. So if you didn't attend, it was in this room yesterday. If you didn't get a chance to be here yesterday afternoon, it's an eye-opening bit of research and well articulated, and I encourage everybody here, when you get a chance, view that, because it'll give you a lot of information that you'll need in your conversations with others.
I think somebody did post it to the progressives on Facebook.
Right.
Yep, sure did.